Susan Patterson is a national leader in the fight against human trafficking. She's the author of the book, How You Can Fight Human Trafficking, Over 100 Ways to Make a Difference. Her book has been recommended by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and her website, through godsgrace.com, and her YouTube channel offer many educational resources for you to go see after the talk. Her main focus is to work with faith communities to facilitate for communities to take action. So we're very excited to have her here, and with her expertise, show us what this evil of human trafficking is all about. And also, I just want to give you some housekeeping rules. We are going to be having at the end of her talk Q&A. The way we're going to do it is under the chat. You'll see a Q&A section where you can write your questions, and then she'll choose the questions she will have time to ask at the end of the talk. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Susan.
Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to start with prayer. So let's bow our heads. Dear God, we know that you've heard the cries of the victims, and we ask that the Holy Spirit come tonight and come into our hearts and lead us with regard to what we personally should be doing, that you are calling us for with regard to human trafficking. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. All right, everyone, I have a PowerPoint that I put together that I wanted to share with you, and at the end we will answer questions. So this is understanding the business of human trafficking in the US. So let me see, this thing is not progressing. Hold on a second, it was earlier. Let me try this again. So from the beginning. Here we go. All right. So according to a major human trafficking task force, law enforcement is 3% of the solution, nonprofits are 7%, and the community is 90% of the solution to the end of human trafficking. In other words, we are not going to arrest our way out of this problem. The main role of the faith community is to prevent human trafficking. Given that 51% of people in the US attend a faith community, we have the power to prevent human trafficking. If we don't prevent it, it will never end. In the US, 22% of people are Catholic. So especially for us to get together and collaborate and raise our voices, we really can make a difference with this issue. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is obtaining or maintaining the labor or services of another person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. With a minor, law enforcement does not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion in order to convict for sex trafficking. So in other words, if a 15-year-old says, I want to do this because I love my boyfriend and we're doing this until he gets a job, she's still a human trafficking victim because according to the law, she cannot give consent. But that's only for sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is different. There are poor families in this country who do have their children working, and the employers may be in violation of labor law, but they're not considered human trafficking victims because this is something they're willingly doing. There's no force, fraud, or coercion. They are trying to help their families. So we want to, be clear about that. So how big is the problem? Academics predict that human trafficking will surpass drugs in size in 2 to 5 years. In the US, over 80% of victims are US citizens. This is important because many people make the assumption that most human trafficking victims in the US are foreigners. That's not true. Most human trafficking victims are kids who have been tricked online, foster children, people who are poor, like that. So they're US citizens. This is not a foreign problem. Your San Francisco mayor established an anti-human trafficking task force in 2013. In this report, which you can find at his website, 31% of identified victims were minors, 51% were women of color, Black and brown, as this does impact people who are poor because they're marginalized, so they're taken advantage of. So first, let's look at sex trafficking. So according to Dr. Melissa Farley, 80% of prostituted persons are under third-party control, meaning they're not independent sex workers. They're people who are, you know, they may think they're a girlfriend of a boyfriend, they may be severely traumatized and tortured to be doing it, but they're under third-party control. The pimps brand their victims with tattoos and GPS chip them, because the mindset of the pimp or human trafficker is that they own their victims. The tattoo branding lets everyone know who owns who. You'll oftentimes find these women with a tattoo on their face with the name of their pimp. And so every time that woman looks in her mirror, she's clear that somebody owns her. If the victims try to run away, the pimp can find them using GPS tracking. The way sex is sold is endless. In addition to escort sites and massage parlors, sex is sold at truck stops, sporting events, etc., virtually anywhere men hang out. Now, this happens to be a van that's going around Los Angeles. Now, Backpage Pro, just to clarify, is not a human trafficker. They're a platform where people can post an ad to sell sex. It could be independent sex workers where there's no force, fraud, or coercion. It could be a human trafficker is posting an ad of one of their victims. We don't know. All we know is that there are tons of platforms like this where sex is sold and people know where to go because it's advertised everywhere. Platforms like this, like people just go to the newspaper and they could be looking at sports and there's an ad to go to a site. So it's all organized. At these internet sites, one can order people by race, hair color, preferred sex acts, etc. First one enters their zip code, then once they have made their selections, they can have a client meet in Southern California, which is where I am, in 1 hour, and that's probably true in Northern California, where they just tell them where they can meet up. Gangs have given up their rivalries to work together. So we're seeing in Southern California, all over California, that gangs that used to kill each other are actually collaborating because there's so much money in this. You know, I was listening to one of a sheriff and he was talking about a 26-year-old who was making close to $700,000 a year. So they're not going to mess with that. So experts estimate that over 70% of human trafficking is controlled by organized crime. Organized crime means a highly centralized enterprise run by criminals for the purpose of engaging in illegal activity. Examples are gangs like street gangs, outlaw banker gangs. Also, the Mexican cartel is very much involved, and all the mafias, depending on where in the country you are, whoever has the power. So for instance, at the high end, where people will pay a lot of money for a Russian model, the Russian mafia is running that. On the streets where you see street prostitution, it's usually the local gangs. Quotas are $1,000 a night for street prostitution. If the prostituted person, doesn't make quota, they are severely punished. If they try to run away, they're beaten within an inch of their life. They are cut, burned, punched, waterboarded, ice baths, whatever it takes to, quote, motivate them to make sure they meet quota. As a result, human trafficking victims experience a higher rate of PTSD than soldiers involved in conflict. This is one study. I'm not going to read the whole thing. King College London found that 39% of adults and 20% of children who were trafficked had PTSD. Depending on the type of conflict, the rate of PTSD for soldiers is 10 to 31%. In other words, if it's intense combat, 31% will come away with PTSD. But here we're saying that 39% of adult victims and 27% of minors have severe PTSD as a result of being trafficking victims. The crime of human trafficking is glamorized and widely promoted. In addition to YouTube videos, there are YouTube videos like, how to be a pimp, how much money you can make. There are books that will tell you exactly how to manipulate and trick your victim. In many rap videos, as you know, they glamorize pimping. And in their world, they see themselves as business people who, and I quote, who are using, or helping women, to use the gift that God gave them. That's how they see it. They are totally detached from the trauma that they are causing their victims. They even have a national Top Pimp of the Year award where they meet in Los Angeles. They met at the Players Club about 3 years ago. Then next year they went to Chicago, where they get the top pimps or traffickers together. They have a party, they vote, they give them an award. I mean, this is, they're not underground is what I'm trying to tell you. They're very much hiding in plain sight. They're connected through social media where they share hot tips, videos, how to get more buyers, how to keep their victims in line, how to avoid arrests, and they hold national events like this. There are even, for the buyer side, they even have their own rating system. So they have John boards, which is similar to Yelp for businesses. This is like Yelp for prostitution, only it's not Yelp. They're called John boards. Most John boards are very graphic. This one you see here that I found is very, very toned down. It's just here to give you an example. The ones that are graphic, it would not be appropriate to show. For massage parlors, they also have their own rating system. You pay a subscription, you pay to be part of this, where you can find, you just go in and enter your zip code, you can find out what massage parlors are in your area, the name of the masseur, what sex acts they provide, how good they are, how much they charge. It's all very organized. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about ways that we, especially as a community, both as a faith community and a community at large, can help. So the key to ending human sex trafficking is to destroy the fantasy. The ads, the websites, the prostitute people themselves all lead sex buyers into believing that they're enjoying the act. Once the sex buyer understands that they are acting, it takes the thrill out of it. This crime is run by money. If there was no money from buyers, it would end. I personally have been challenged by sex buyers where they have told me, I've never been with a human trafficking victim. That's what they're telling me. I'm with women who are into it and want to do it. What's the harm? And I ask them, I go, how do you know you're not with a victim of human trafficking? And their response is, she was totally into it. And what I told them was, I don't think you understand how this business works. If she acted terrified or cried and asked you to rescue her, or didn't act like she was into it, and you complained to the pimp, she would be severely punished. So they have to act like they're into it. And the buyers really can't tell who's an independent sex worker and who's a victim of human trafficking. Now, what we found through many studies is that if you destroy the fantasy, because, it kind of takes the thrill out of it to know that you're with someone who's acting. And if you let people know that these are victims, then many sex buyers will stop buying sex. We have found that across the board. However, for the addicts, they can't stop. So the community can provide programs to help both sex addicts and reduce porn viewing, which is driving sex buying. So the Celebrate Recovery is a fabulous program that churches are doing for addictive behavior like sex addiction. The Conquer series is designed for Christian men. It has a 90% success rate. They have DVDs, workshops, etc. Any faith community can host a program. And why this is important is this. I was speaking at a conference, and one of the speakers there shared that the husband of her best friend was a sex buyer, and he couldn't stop. He was a sex addict. And what happened was his niece became a victim of human trafficking. And so now he understood that he was causing harm by sex buying. But because he couldn't stop, he committed suicide. It would have made a huge difference if there had been a program where he could have come to. So, and given our churches are about healing, this is important. So who buys sex? This is a groundbreaking study. It's from Demand Abolitionist, the Cease Network. And this is they looked at the sex buying habits of 8,000 men. And this is a couple points from the report. 6.2% of men buy sex. Race had no profiling power, meaning 6.2% of white men, 6.2% of black men, 6.2% of Hispanics, Asians like that percent did not change within the race, that there are, a certain percent of men within each race who will buy sex. That was group one. Then there's the second group. This is occasional buyers. The second group is repeat buyers. And what they found was that repeat buyers are responsible for 75% of the buying. They call themselves hobbyists, by the way. I mean, doesn't that sound innocuous, like they're not doing anything wrong? So these hobbyists are responsible for 75% of the buying. Their profile is that they make over $150,000 a year. So where there's wealth and sex addiction, you're going to find repeat buying. Their general habit, though, it was a lifestyle where they felt they would work hard all day. On the way home, they would get a massage. And while they were at the massage parlor, they would buy a sex act. That's what most of the repeat buyers were doing. Now, this is important. They asked men who were not buyers what would have them buy. And 20% of men who did not buy sex said they would consider it if the circumstances were right, like legalizing prostitution. In studies that have been done with over 150 countries, they found that once prostitution was legalized, sex buying exploded. And because there aren't enough women and boys who are willing to be prostituted person, what happens is prostitute people, then organized crime brings in people from other countries, aggressively goes after citizens of that country, and victimizes people in order to fulfill the demand. When sex buyers were asked what would keep them from buying, a common answer was a night in jail. So we do need to increase penalties for sex buyers. Right now, penalties are weak. Often just a ticket, they pay a few $100s, they're done. It's like a slap on the wrist. The other most common answer was, if I thought my wife or social network would find out, I would stop. This actually was more powerful than even a night in jail, because a night in jail meant that their social network would find out, or it would go on their record. So it's shame is actually the biggest deterrent against sex buying, especially for those who are repeat buyers. Now, there are many counties that have tried billboard shaming, where they actually put the picture of the person who bought on a billboard where everyone sees it. And just the threat of that happening has reduced buying. The problem is that the family was also victimized because everyone knew. So they're trying other things. One of county is doing is they're taking the sex buyer home in a police car and dropping them off, so they get to explain to their family why they were dropped off, sending a letter home, or some other ways to use this deterrent, which we all know is a very powerful deterrent. Cease Network is using chatbots. They partner with law enforcement, and what they do is this. Just hold on, I have to get some water. So they place ads, law enforcement's placing ads, whatever, I mean, I've seen these ads. It's, you'll have the time of your life available now, like that. And they chat back and forth with the respective buyer. And at one point, the chatbot lets the buyer know that what they're doing is illegal and that their information has been given to law enforcement. This is a great use of technology to reduce sex buying. All of a sudden, the buyer knows that law enforcement is involved, and it puts them on notice that they could wind up being arrested, or the shame, people would find out. Now let's look at some of the tactics human traffickers use to trick people into becoming victims. So for children, actually anyone, within minutes of going online with any app, children are often solicited by a predator who will use graphic sexual language. I mean, I have seen this. It made me blush. I can't even imagine the impact on that 10-year-old. 1 in 5 children are solicited sexually while on the internet before the age of 18. That's the National Children's Alliance nationwide child abuse statistics. Clearly, we shouldn't give our children internet access, and any law enforcement officer will tell you they wouldn't even dream of giving their children internet access with a cell phone before the age of 15 or 16, where they know what sex is, they could understand what a predator is, and they have the ability to protect themselves. The average age of entry into the life or becoming a victim of human trafficking is 12. A trafficker can make well over $300,000 a year off of one teen. For that reason, they are very aggressive about recruiting them as victims. They are online and everywhere teens hang out. So what's a recruiter? Now, the human traffickers know that if some 35-year-old guy approaches a kid, that kid's going to know that that's probably a bad guy and be wary. So what they do is they recruit kids or, individuals, boys and girls their age, put them everywhere teens hang out, at schools, with their main line being, you're already doing it anyway, you might as well get paid for it. And to a naive child, that doesn't sound that bad, especially for, minors who are sexually active. So it's very subtle the way they go at it, and they'll show them all their bling and say, you can have this bling, $50, 15 minutes, and you can, have what I have. Now, what's really scary to me about these recruiters is they will use girls because people are more trusting of women. So what happens for a parent is, for most parents, if their daughter brings a new boy home, that boy will usually get the 3rd degree. If they bring a new girl home and says, I have a new friend from school, usually the response from a parent is, good for you. So they oftentimes use girls, and who can easily suck them in. Here we have the 3 types of pimps, we call them. The Romeo pimp. The victim considers this guy to be her boyfriend. He tricks her with tactics like, babe, you know I love you, and I hate for you to do this, but you only need to do this until I get a job. In other words, the Romeo pimp doesn't come across as someone who's forcing them. And when we find victims who are with a Romeo pimp, they don't consider themselves to be victims at all. They're in love with this guy and he can't help it, and he doesn't want them to suffer, but, and all the rest of that. So this is the Romeo pimp. The guerrilla pimp, these are gangs, uses force, like kidnapping. Their gangs are involved in guerrilla pimping, where if for young people who live in a gang neighborhood, they're told that they need to do this to make money for the gang, that they are not given a choice. So guerrilla pimping is all about force. The CEO pimp, this is where the fraud comes in. This is all about trickery. So they offer jobs in order to trap one, like modeling jobs. And once they get them in, then they turn on them. One woman described it as, this guy promised her everything. She'd be famous, make all this money, whatever. And he said to her, he gave her a form and he said, just fill this out. I need for you to fill it out so I can pay you. And on it, she put her name, address, her parents' address, because she was in school in case she went back, like that. And one day she said to him, I don't want to do this anymore. She's a college student. And he said, I know where your parents live. I know where you live. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to go kill your roommate and kill your parents. So she continued to work as a model for him. Drugged and videotaped or kidnapped from parties is another approach. So a recruiter, often a woman, chats the teen up and puts a drug in their drink. Then they're taken upstairs to be videotaped while being raped and then blackmailed into becoming a prostituted person, the trafficker threatens to send the video to everyone the child knows. Again, shame. They are so afraid of that happening that they'll do what the trafficker tells them to do. These are the kids who actually are living at home. They're living at home. What everyone sees is they're exhausted because they've been up half the night, because they've been sneaking out and servicing clients for the trafficker and then going to school the next day. So this also is going on. Shame is a powerful motivator. Victims will keep their secret to avoid a video being sent out. Can you imagine how agonizing that is to be living with that kind of secret and going through that kind of trauma, and you can't tell anyone? You're sitting around the dinner table and your parents don't know. I mean, it's got to be agony. Over 70% of victims come from the foster care system. So if you feel called to be a foster parent or mentor, that is the best protection for these children from ever becoming a victim. So children who are marginalized, they may have a single parent who's working all the time, big brothers, big sisters, you can protect them. So let's look, before we go to that, I just want to talk about, there's another very vulnerable group, and that is homeless youth. So kids who have aged out of the foster care system, about 50% become homeless within a year. Homeless youth, ages 18 to 24, according to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 1 out of 5 will become a victim of human trafficking. So now let's look at labor trafficking. Labor trafficking includes domestic servants, sweatshops, cleaning services, pornography, construction, farming, restaurant workers, elder care facilities, factories, nail salons, forced begging, etc. Here, this is from Polaris. Here's the most common relationship to the trafficker for minors. So 35% of the family is actually trafficking their children for the purposes of labor and sometimes sex because they're poor. This is not like a legitimate job. This is where they're forcing their children to do something they don't want to do. This is not, there's two types when I'm talking about family. One is they might ask a child to work a few hours a day. So those might be the children selling flowers on the freeway or something. They're working a few hours a day. Their parents are there, you know, to pick them up and help them, whatever. That's just a child helping out the family. Then there's the labor trafficking victims where they're forced to do this. They're taken out of school and they're forced to do it. 34% is more what we think of as a trafficker. A landlord, a smuggler, a dealer, a substance provider, a drug dealer will be the one who's trafficking them. 25% is their employer. Now, there are several variations of how victims are recruited for labor trafficking. We'll focus on the main three themes for adults. So most labor trafficking victims are men. Many are men who are here illegally, so they're taking advantage for that reason. In the US and other developed countries, people are promised jobs where they become like slaves. Now, they may even be citizens, so the traffickers will go into areas and pick up people who are really desperate for a job and take them to farms in the Midwest and Northern California and force them to work. They're paid next to nothing. In some cases, it's extreme, where they, especially on these farms in the Midwest, where they are kept under control with beatings. They're chained up at night when they're asleep, and they're under guard to make sure they don't escape. These are farms like in the middle of nowhere, and their families often do not know what happened to them. People from foreign countries are promised the American dream. This is what most people are familiar with. They're told that there'll be jobs waiting for them in a short time. They can work off their debt and be free. The reality is that they never get out of debt and remain a slave forever. Organized crime brings them here and then distributes them through their networks to become elderly home workers, factory workers, forced prostitution, etc. Now, how do we recognize these people? The answer is, if you see anyone, especially like an elder care facility, working 24/7, they could be a victim of labor trafficking. I met a group of people, they had been rescued because a neighbor in a residential area where there was an elder care home noticed that the people who work there never came to work in the morning and never, sorry about that, and never left. So that didn't look right. I was speaking one time and I was there with Homeland Security, and one woman raised her hand and said, you know, every time I visit my mom, I notice the same people are there, no matter what day I go, no matter what time of the day I go. She said, should I report that? And the Homeland Security agent said, yes. Well, and she said, well, I asked him why they're always there. And he said, we work double shifts. I said, for all you know, they could be told to say that. So it's okay. The police will never penalize you if you report something that you think doesn't look right. Skilled workers like software developers are promised very lucrative positions. They're given temporary visas. However, the agency that promised them jobs takes a significant amount of the money. This is considered fraud and is a form of labor trafficking. So in other words, they're told whatever, that they're going to come here and make $70,000. By the time all is said and done, they make like 20 or 30. People don't necessarily, a lot of people don't consider that necessarily labor trafficking, but according to the definition of the law, it is trafficking because it's a form of fraud. This is a great organization that was established where people from Mexico, if they came here and they wound up being trafficking victims, they were promised a good job and instead it was complete fraud. They can report it at this website and name the company, because the problem is this recruitment process controlled by the recruiters, which makes fraud possible. And you know, nobody knows until they get here, but this website lets them report that without fear of losing their jobs. So this will help. This is a great example of helping people, and this is an independent nonprofit, do something about labor trafficking so they're not tricked. At the Polaris site, one can find great information on how to recognize victims of human trafficking. Here's the number. Everyone should have it in their phone. I'll just take a minute so you can do that. This is the Human Trafficking Hotline, 1-800-3737-888. Now, for this number, it's anonymous and you don't need to be afraid of calling, because when you call, they'll ask you what you saw and they'll help educate you on whether or not this is truly a human trafficking situation or not. And if they think it is, they will call the appropriate law enforcement to come and they will tell you what to do. So this is a fabulous resource. So what else can the community do? You can put out posters and bathroom stickers so victims know where they can get help. Often the only time victims are alone is in the bathroom. So many groups have put up bathroom stickers in areas where human trafficking has been known to occur, like sporting events. So in other words, if a woman goes to the bathroom, the trafficker is not going to follow her into the bathroom. Sometimes they'll look inside, but then she goes into her stall. This shows it, and then they're inside the stall and they can see this. So they know where they can get help. And there's a text number so they can do it. And it educates them. So this is something a lot of groups, especially churches, have put together their youth group where they've gone out because they have a lot of energy. And after getting permission from the hotel or the sporting event, they'll go around and put stickers in bathrooms. This is great. Now, over 90% of victims see a health professional while they are victims. The human traffickers do not take the victims to a doctor because they care about them. They take them to the doctor if they have a health issue where they can't work. So if they have broken ribs from an assault from a buyer, or if a buyer gets an STD, then that hurts their business. They won't use that pimp again. So taking a victim to the doctor is all about the money and nothing else. So it's very important that health professionals receive training. There is the Department of Health and Human Resources offers a training called SOAR with webinars and all kinds, and they can also let them know. Dignity Health has programs for all their hospitals. Dignity Health, by the way, is a Catholic hospital network, and they offer trainings for hospitals outside their network if they want. They hired someone who is a former victim of human trafficking to help them put a program together so that they can recognize victims. One really clever thing that they did was this, is when a victim is brought into a hospital, she's usually brought in with, they call this woman the bottom girl. She's really like right under the pimp. And when she walks in, she will tell the health professional, this person cannot speak English, I have to translate. So I have to be with them at all times. So they trained the hospital to say, okay, if they think something's suspicious, we need to take them down to get an x-ray. And then the bottom woman will say, I need to go with her to translate. They'll say, no, we have our own translators, and hospital policy doesn't allow you to come. So then they get the victim aside and they can talk to them. Now, most of the time they're too afraid to leave, but they plan the idea in their head and they give them the number and have them memorize it. And they make sure, some people are, think they give them a card, they should give them a card or whatever. If that pimp ever finds that card on them, they'll beat them within an inch of their life. So they have them stand there. They don't make them. They have them just be there and memorize that number in case they ever want to get out. Many cities have added what does human trafficking look like as part of the Neighborhood Watch program and have had their postal workers trained on what to look out for. Homeland Security does this training for postal workers. There have been many arrests by employing the strategy. In one case, a very prominent, wealthy city in Orange County, the police do have what does human trafficking look like as part of the Neighborhood Watch program. And they've made 3 arrests in luxury apartment complexes. One of the things that people, in terms of their notions of what human trafficking looks like in the reality, most people think human trafficking looks like street prostitution and, on the bad section of town. So people in luxury apartments would not necessarily think that human trafficking is happening next door to them, but they taught them what to look for, which is men in suits and ties coming and going at lunch or after work. So, and they saw that and they called the police, and sure enough, it was human trafficking. There were a lot of them who were coming and going, and that woke them up. So having what does human trafficking look like as part of the Neighborhood Watch program is something that many cities are doing. You can ask your city and counties. This will go a long way towards having people rescued in a safe way because law enforcement's involved. So the importance of community involvement. This 2016 report, Identifying Effective Counter-Trafficking Programs and Practices in the U.S., Legislative, Legal, and Public Opinion Strategies That Work, stated that when stricter laws were combined with community involvement, the instance of human trafficking decreased. If you remember the first slide I showed, that the community is 90% of the solution. This thing is way too pervasive, way too pervasive. Cease Network, I talked to you about the chatbots. They ran a few ads out of thousands of ads that were run in the city of Phoenix. And Phoenix, by the way, is 1/6 the size of LA. They ran only a few ads, and in 4 days, 247 men called in. And that was only a few ads compared to thousands. So this problem is huge. Unless we, as the community, educate people, because for the most part, and I've done my own personal survey, I don't know if you've done it, where I'll ask people to supermarket, the checker, as I'm going through, do you think human trafficking is happening in the city? They'll say no, or maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 people or whatever, but they don't really understand for the most part, especially if things are calm, how pervasive it is because it's invisible. We need to make it visible. Sorry that my thing keeps progressing. Apparently it's coded into this PowerPoint to keep going. Anyway, my YouTube channel, and I'll give you my website and you can find it there, offers training videos and actions you can do at your church. If you would like to create a dynamic anti-human trafficking ministry, I have a video for that. It's about 15 minutes, and other videos about what churches can do, the difference they can make, that will give you ideas that fit perfectly for a church. One thing you can do is host a fair trade table at your church fair. Of all human trafficking in the world, 2/3 is labor trafficking, and we're buying those products. Many people are under the notion that because human trafficking is illegal, we don't allow products in our country that are made by slaves. And California does have one of the strictest laws regarding transparency in supply chains to keep it out, but it still comes in. Coffee, tea, chocolate, none, that food is not sourced or grown here. And it has a lot of child labor in those industries. So unless those industries are vigilant, and unless your coffee says fair trade on it and your tea and your chocolate, it could be made by slaves. So you want to do your part by being a responsible consumer. Trader Joe's has great fair trade coffee. Go to your supermarket. Some places like Trader Joe's, it doesn't cost very much more at all. Other places, it's a lot more expensive, but you can do your part by demanding. Now, Starbucks, by the way, because so many people wrote to Starbucks, all their coffee now is fair trade. My complaint with Starbucks is they have this huge opportunity to make the public aware of what fair trade means, and they're not. They could have posters up in their shops explaining about labor trafficking, child labor, and why they have only fair trade coffee, but they're not. So that's an area where if you're kind of a letter writing advocate type, that's something maybe you might want to take on. You can engage the youth. And you definitely want to engage the youth in this issue because they're very vulnerable, because they can make more money off of them. They're easier to trick. So by getting them engaged in fun ways is a great way to raise their awareness. So some churches have had poster contests where they made awareness posters for human trafficking and gave them a prize. They got them involved in creating skits where someone pretend to be a trafficker and trick a kid. Very educational. Another thing that churches have done with teens is taken them to a mall and have them do freeze frames. So what that is this, is they make up a sign and then they go to a mall, a group of about 6, 8 of them, and then they'll stand there and hold up their sign and freeze. And then in a minute, they'll change positions, they'll move around, and then hold up their sign again and freeze. This gets a lot of attention from people at the mall, and the kids have a blast and they really feel like they made a difference. So it's really, for any of your youth pastors or whatever, they can go to my website. They can find a lot of ideas about how to involve the youth. In your area, you have the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, with their mission being to build a strong group of anti-trafficking advocates and experts in your area. And if you want more education about what's happening in your area, who's doing what law enforcement's doing, what different nonprofits are doing, you may want to volunteer with a nonprofit. If you contact them and go to their meetings or just contact them, you could find local efforts. This is my website, throughgodsgrace.com. I'll just give you a minute to write that down in case you want to go there. You can find my YouTube channel there. You can find PowerPoints on the educational resource. You can find videos. You can find ideas for how to involve the youth. All my work, by the way, for the last 10 years has been working with the faith community. And personally, I haven't met anyone who's made that kind of commitment to the faith community. I talk to dioceses and other denominational communities other than the Catholic community all over the country, because it took me a while. It took me years to actually figure this out. Like, what can a church do? What works for a church? Things like that. So I offer those resources and ways to get engaged from a faith community perspective. Your next event that the Archdiocese of San Francisco is offering, and when you registered, I'm sure you saw there were lots of events. There's going to be another presentation on human trafficking. But the next one is Monday, February 8th at 6:30 p.m., which is the Feast of St. Josephine Backpage. Now, Pope Francis declared February 8th, the feast day of Josephine Backpage, as Human Trafficking Awareness Day for the Catholic community all over the world. So a lot of Catholic churches will get together, and we have COVID now, but your diocese, your archdiocese, sorry, is getting together to celebrate Human Trafficking Awareness Day, her feast day, by saying the rosary. And for those of you who are prayer warriors, you want to come, and clearly God's going to be the one who's going to end human trafficking, not us. He can work through us, and we can take lots of actions, but he is the only one who's going to do it. So prayer is so important in this effort. All right, so I'm now available to answer any questions. So let me see, I'll click on that, I think.
Yeah, we have the first one. Let me read it to you.
All right, yeah, for some reason I can't access it, but oh, I think I need to stop sharing. Okay. Sorry about that.
I can read it to you.
I can see it now. I can see it. All right. Do you want me to read it, or Maria, would you like to read it?
Okay, I'll read it. Can some places use private investigators to go on this site and catch those using the site?
All right. So I think they're referring to like Backpage Pro. You don't ever want to use private investigators. You always want to work with the police and find out what they're doing, because if you don't do it right, you ruin their case. And for all you know, they're creating a case. But you can, and let's be clear that who you can go after, who are you going to go after? Buyers? I mean, you're going to go after the prostituted women themselves. That's actually not very useful. It's really the buyers and the pimps where, it's going to make a difference. So, I mean, it's a free country. You're welcome to do anything, but please do not do anything like that unless you've talked to local law enforcement and you understand, who's doing what.
The second question is, they wonder if this has increased with remote learning for all kids in the past year, if you know.
Yes, we have noticed a definite increase in children being trying to be tricked, approached, whatever you want to call this. And with regard to receiving this PowerPoint presentation, I actually have this at my site. But one thing I want to talk about is this with regard to children, is human trafficking is one aspect of how children are being exploited. There's another, which is they're being tricked and then used as sex trafficking victims, being offered to buyers of sex to have sex with them. But there's another area for even younger children. And we talk about devices, and I mentioned before, given what I've seen, I would never give a child a cell phone. Because where there's also a ton of money is child porn. So they'll go out, the children upload videos to TikToks or whatever, and they'll say, oh, you're cute or whatever. And, and they have a way where they can pay them money. And, first they'll have them take their shirt off, and then pretty soon they have them do things that these children, according to statistics, about 8 hours where they trick them into taking videos of themselves and sending it to pedophiles. According to Opal Singleton, who's the one of the top digital exploitation experts in this country, over 9,000 children a day are being sextorted, meaning being tricked into sending child porn. I have a friend, and her best friend's daughter, this happened to her. She's 9 years old, and the way they were made aware of it is their 9-year-old daughter tried to commit suicide. So how do we prevent it? We block them from this. We have, there are apps you can use. There's like Covenant Eyes, and that's also in my presentation, all the different apps, what they can do, what they can't do, and how to block your gaming systems, because that's where they're finding kids, is through the chat rooms and the gaming systems. Now, it's exhausting, I know that, but we need to do it. But there is there is hope for me in this respect, is the internet has grown faster than our ability to really be on top of, what do we do about this and all this exploitation. But there is an act that's being sponsored by nonprofits called the, I think it's called the Online Child Protection Act, which is this. Right now, corporations or these sites, these platforms for gaming systems have zero responsibility in whether or not a child is exploited at their site. So if your child, let's say your child was exploited playing a game at one of these sites, you cannot sue them. So they want to pass a law that says that these sites have to use AI, artificial intelligence, because it's now available, where they can track and determine intent and whether or not there's a predator who's part of the chat, and to keep them out and block them out. And what the law says, that if they're taking action to protect kids, if they can show they're taking sufficient action, they can't be sued. But if they're taking no action, they can be sued. So this is something that would be great, because it would partner with parents to be able to take care of their kids. So it's not such a burden, because as soon as they get on one app, another app comes up. And that's something that, you know, the kind of thing that you want to be aware of and support. And I can give you, I'm trying to think of the website. I'll post it on my website that does that stuff. That kind of, they're all about protecting kids, and they can update you if you're an advocacy type who wants to get involved with something like that. All right, so how will the coronavirus change the labor exploitation we have to increase sexual exploitation more? Okay, and I believe there are exploiting restaurants 15 hours a day, the same person there 6 days a week. All right, I don't know about how the coronavirus would change it. I do know that there is labor trafficking, and where people are made to work 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. Now, again, if there's force, fraud, or coercion, it's labor trafficking. If there's just fraud, then sometimes they can't make a case for that, but that is violating our labor laws. So either way, you should be reporting something like that. Now, I don't know if I answered your question or not. So if you want to say something else to just kind of clarify it for me about how the coronavirus, but definitely if you see anything that doesn't look right, please call that number, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Definitely, if you see a minor, especially like street prostitution, they look young to you and they're involved in street prostitution, and you call the police, they will be on it. They will be on it. So you definitely want to, rather than, you know, before now, like 10 years ago when I first started, people would see things like that and assume that they wanted to do it and we should leave them alone and not get involved. That's not what's happening. All right, I don't want to start getting on a rant here. I'm like outraged by so much of what I've seen.
Thank you. We still have one more question.
Sure. And you can keep adding questions. That's fine. We have plenty of time here, so that's fine.
I'm going to read it because I don't know if everybody can read them, so I'm going to read it. Is there a way for us to
I can read it. Do you want me to read it? All right.
Go ahead.
Is there a way for us to help in providing a safe space or haven for victims? I live alone, a nurse professional, extra room in my home. Can someone like myself help? Absolutely. And you need training. There's a whole thing of training. And this is, by the way, I love it that you asked this question. I love it that I have time to answer it, which is this. The fact of the matter is this. Even after victims have been rescued and put through a program, which could take years, by the way, to be rehabilitated and help them get a job and all the rest of it, 51% of those survivors return to the life of prostitution because they have no community to be part of. They have no friends other than the ones they left behind in the life. They have no community. So the ideal situation would be for a church to approach a nonprofit who takes care of victims and say, we want to be that community. And then, and please train our people, train, you know, whatever group of advocates, like the person who said, I have, you know, a room in my house, if you would be willing to be an advocate and get trained, because you have to know how to understand how to be a friend to someone who has PTSD and has been traumatized. It's not the same. And then you bring them to your church, invite them to come to your church, you invite them to a Bible study, you invite them to your singles group, you use your community and network to help them find a sitter for their kids, you use your community to help them get a job so they have a community to be part of. They are far less likely to return to the life. And yes, they would love to use a room in your house. And, you know, definitely you could talk to a nonprofit and let them know that you have that available. But don't let them just say, okay, send someone over. Tell them that you know that you need to be trained in some way in terms of how to relate to them. Because, you know, people with PTSD act out, meaning they get upset very easy. So you need to understand how to de-escalate a situation like that if they get triggered. So anyway, great question, by the way. Thank you so much for that. That was very generous.
I think that they can also offer like foster care, right? Since like 70% you said it was foster care.
Yeah, over
children.
70% of victims have had some contact. So if you feel called to be a foster parent, go to any agency that does foster parenting, DCSF, you know, Department of Children and Family Services, or like that, and at least go to an orientation. I myself am a foster adoptive mom. Go to an orientation and find out what's involved. I thought if I went to an orientation, they would like grab me and go, oh my God, you have to do this. That's not what happened. The orientation was actually about talking people out of it, because people came in with these ideals and they let them know that it would be hard, not hard 24/7, what would be involved, the kind of training I would have to go through in order to be a good parent to this child. And then I wound up adopting him. I'm a foster adoptive mom. And it's the best thing I've ever done, because I was clear God was calling me, but it was unreasonable. At the time I took it on, I was a 53-year-old widow with one child. And it was unreasonable, but I knew God was calling me. I just knew God. And the way I knew God was calling me was this, by the way, is I said to God, I said, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And nothing would come. And then what happened was I noticed that every time I saw a foster child, or they had any commercial, like, you know, adopt children, or I heard anything on the radio, I would burst into tears. And I went, okay, God, I don't need a burning bush. I got it. All right, I got it. You have deeply touched me on this. I'll go do it, and I'll keep following it. And it all turned out, and it's been awesome. All right, so do I have any stats on how many pimps have been held accountable actually to prison time? Okay, so this is a good question. There's actually an effort. This is part of our problem, is pimping is not considered a violent crime. And in the state of California, because we don't have a lot of resources, they serve very little of their time, and they oftentimes run their business from it. So I don't know the percent. That is something you could ask the San Francisco Collaborative, because they would have those kinds of statistics, because they're closely involved with law enforcement. Law enforcement would have that. All right, how about reconnecting victims with their families who may not know where they are? All the nonprofits who take care of victims absolutely try to find their families. But part of the problem is this: the reason why they became a human trafficking victim to begin with is very often they had broken families, or they ran away with their boyfriend and they're afraid their family's going to be so mad at them, they'll never take them back. But these nonprofits will work with them and say, let's just call your mother and see what she says. What's the worst that can happen? She yells at you. And then they call and find out that this mother starts sobbing. Oh my God, you know, I thought you were dead. Yes, come home. So we have those wonderful stories. And then we have the other side, where their parents were drug addicts. Very often their parents are the ones who were the ones who sold them to fill their drug habits, so they can't go back. There's not a family they can go back to. So any other questions? Or
I think we have
numerous abortions. Actually, in some ways, this is just as tragic. They sell their babies. They can get a lot of money for those babies. So these poor women, if they get pregnant, then sometimes they get an abortion, but sometimes they keep them and sell their baby because they can get more for the baby than they can being sex trafficked. And who they sell those babies to are not people who would pass a DCSF, questionnaire. So it's tragic. I have met victims who have had their babies taken from them and they have no idea where that child is. So it goes both ways. It's very tragic. And there are baby farms. I don't know if you're aware of that, because we only talked about sex and labor trafficking. There's organ trafficking, there's baby farms, There was one pretty local where I was, where they were taking in women from a foreign country and having them have babies and selling their babies. It's big business, by the way, baby trafficking.
Wow. That's awful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Susan. I think we've reached, it's 7:30. So I think we reached the end of the seminar. And I think we don't have any more questions. Thank you so much for the information. It was a lot, and it was very informative. And I hope we can have you back again at the Archdiocese.
Thank you,
and,
Maria.
yeah, we can work with you in putting together another topic related to human trafficking, and we can get our churches organized. So thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you. And we will see you again for the Feast of St. Bakhita. And then the talk after that will be specifically about child sex trafficking. So stay tuned for that. Thank you. And good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.